This is part two of social and cultural diversity. We're going to pick back up, um, starting fresh essentially with ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism uses one's own culture as a yardstick to measure all others. Statements like superior race, savages, backward people, or the chosen few capture the essence of ethnocentrism. They use their own values as a standard of reference and view themselves as superior. All societies are ethnocentric in a sense, thinking that one's own group is superior. Ethnocentrism is based on opinion. The opposite would be a proven fact. So the opposite of ethnocentrism is a proven fact because it's completely opinion. It promotes a sense of patriotism and national sovereignty, which is done deliberately because it's like, oh, like land, think land of the free, land, home of the brave. Like that's patriotism, but it's also saying, like, yeah, we're better than you. It promotes stability and pride, yet danger and it's dangerous in the nuclear age because people can take it too far. Acculturation is ethnic and racial minorities. Oh, it's when ethnic and racial minorities integrate or adopt cultural beliefs and customs from the majority or dominant cultural. So acculturation is adopting some of the dominant culture. Assimilation is when the individual has such a high level of acculturation that he or she becomes part of the dominant culture or majority culture. So when you think assimilation, think similar. We now all look the same, i.e., similar, due to conversion slash adoption of the dominant culture. If someone is referring to a sellout would be due to assimilation. You taking on that entire culture um, and have lost your own culture. Acculturation is just picking up some of the habits. So that's acculturation versus assimilation. On occasion, counterculture just, I don't know why this is making me think about counterculture. And counterculture was when you um, were completely against the dominant culture or you opposed your own culture. So it's not necessarily the exact same thing because counterculture is like you opposing your culture, but assimilation is more so like you assimilate so much to the point where everything about you is um, representing the dominant culture. All right. So on occasion, persons of the dominant culture like or even think it's cool to dress, talk, or follow customs set forth via a minority culture. That is appropriation. Think Kim Kardashian. She is most, well, in a sense, she's not of the dominant culture because she's not Caucasian, but essentially, let's just say she's of the dominant culture in the sense of money. Um, and she thinks it's cool to dress like the minority culture, urban culture, which is up have braids. That was the specific one that was crazy. And that's appropriation. Regardless of culture, the popular person has good social skills. That's just a random tidbit. So, regardless of someone's culture, if someone is popular, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have good social skills. The modal, modal personality derived from the, okay, this is a, I'm sorry, this is a box of things to know. So the modal personality derived from the statistical concept of the mode used to describe the score which occurs most frequently. So the mode is the score that occurs most frequently. The modal personality derived from the statistical concept of the mode refers to a given composite personality which is most typical profile of a given group of people. Hmm. The modal personality derived from the statistical concept of the mode, which is what occurs most frequently, refers to a given composite personality, which is most typical which is the most typical profile of a given group of people. So the personality which is characteristic or typical of the group in question. Um, so kind of think about, let's say, athletes, right? So the athletes is the group of people. And then what would be the most typical profile of that given group of people? Let's say, like, of those athletes, their composite personality could be competitive, or it could be, um, I guess competitive would be like a good fit, like athletes competition. It just makes sense. It's the most frequent. You would expect them to be more macho, more aggressive, versus like if you look at the composite personality of a given group of people and it's a band, you would expect them to be a little more intelligent, um, not as aggressive, so that's pretty much modal personality, the mode or in the composite personality of a group. I had to break that one down a little bit. Social exchange theory. Social exchange theory postulates that a relationship will endure if the rewards are greater than the cost. It assumes that rewards are things or factors we like, while costs are things we dislike. A positive relationship is characterized by profit. So think reward minus cost equals profit. You want the reward to be more than the cost, so therefore it's a profit, and this supports the social exchange theory. That a relationship will endure if the rewards are greater than the cost, i.e., making it a positive relationship characterized by profits. The vest pocket definition of relationships is based on behavioral psychology and economic theory. A client who says to a family member, "As long as I pay bills, you'll do your chores," is basing a relationship on rewards and cost. So, my reward is that housework and chores get done. My cost is that I have to go to work and I pay the bills. But to me, that reward of not having to come home and do the chores after work is more than the fact that I have to go to work, because I would have to do that anyway if it was just me. So there's a profit. So that's the best pocket definition of relationships, being based off behavioral psychology and economic theory. So if one person, yeah, I'm gonna just skip that example again. So Complementarity theory says a relationship becomes stronger as the two people's personality needs mesh. So, complementary, one personality can make up what is lacking or missing in the other personality. So, a dominant man and a non dominant woman would have a fine chance of relating well toward each other based off the complementary theory or complementary. So, then we're going back to balance theory. So, balance theory is a move from cognitive inconsistency to consistency, a tendency to achieve a balance. It's a tendency to achieve a balanced cognitive state. Inconsistent thoughts are often referred to as dissonance. Dissonance is a distasteful state of mind which the individual will attempt to change. Most individuals perceive that people whom they perceive as attractive have positive traits. All right, so most individuals perceive that people whom they perceive as attractive have other positive traits. Clients' looks cannot be judged by their client. It says basically it says clients' looks cannot be judged by their covers. Yet this tendency is quite common. So looking at a client like, oh, that person attractive, they shouldn't have any issues, or it's really probably not as bad as they are making it seem. Just those different stereotypes based off of looks. Um, Older adults. Financial security and health are the best predictors of retirement adjustment. How will you handle the adjustment is based on, oh, financial security and health are the best predictors of retirement adjustment. So, how much you have saved in the future in your health depends on, will depend and determine how will you adjust to retirement. How well you handle the adjustment is based on the quality of life you will live financially and physically. Money can help buy happiness when it comes to old age because you need the money for security so you're not stressed out, which could, stress can cause its own problems. Approximately 9.5% of all Americans aged 65 plus have an income below the poverty level, meaning counselors in the future will be increasingly forced to deal with an older population as the U.S. population in general ages. This is so called wave age. Myths for older adults is that their IQ scores or their intelligence drops markedly as folks age. In reality, IQ scores remain fairly stable over the lifespan. A theory of terminal drop or terminal decline postulates that a dramatic decrease in intellectual functioning does occur. But even according to this theory, it only occurs during the final 5 years of life. It usually centers around verbal skills. So it's a myth that your IQ drops as you age. In reality, the scores pretty much stay the same. The only little caveat to that is the terminal drop or terminal decline, which just says like in the last 5 years, there can be a dramatic decrease in intellectual functioning, but that's only in the last 5 years, and it mostly centers around verbal skills and language. The second myth is that the elderly are incapable of sex. So it's not true. Counseling seniors will become more common in the future. The human life expectancy has almost doubled since the early 1900s, when the average hovered below 50 years of age. Gerontological counseling, or gero counseling, is counseling clients over the age of 65. So, geriatric, gerontological counseling is counseling clients over the age of 65. Employment agencies view those who are over 40 as older, and thus those who fit into this age bracket experience longer periods of unemployment than folks who are under 40. Cultural approach to normality is the behavior of the majority of the people defines what is considered normal. Defining behavior, such as in the case of a powerful leader or a genius, may be lauded. Most experts would agree that a multicultural counselor's diagnosis must be done within a cultural context. Remember, cultural relativism, determining what is good and bad based off the cultural context, and then contextualism, which is just determining or viewing or assessing based off the context of one's culture. So the cultural approach to normality says that the behavior of the majority of the people defines what is considered normal. And then, so for those powerful leaders or geniuses who are who show defiant behavior, they're typically lauded or disliked. A counselor who is seeing a client from a different culture would most likely expect less social conformity than he or she would from a client from his or her own culture. So, like, think, but that's basically saying, like, if you're sitting in front of somebody from a different culture, you might be a little more politically correct in your statements or how you express yourself or your verbiage, versus like if you're sitting in front of somebody of your own culture, you might be a little more reserved, a little less reserved, like relaxed. Just think like if you're in some, you may use ebonics, slang, like you're just a little more loose versus um and the opposite is when you're in front of someone of a different culture. The counselor should expect less social conformity. So it said, oh no, I think I described that totally wrong. I said the opposite. So it says a counselor who is seeing a client from a different culture would would most likely expect less social conformity, so than he or she would from a client from his or her own culture. It says we demand more rigid standards from our own culture. So yeah, scratch what I said earlier. That's wrong. Is basically saying, as a counselor, the view would be we have higher expectations for those of our culture. So we expect more social conformity from our culture, and we expect less social conformity from people of a different culture. In the United States, a frequent practice is to see a perfect stranger for therapy, but in other cultures, it would not be the norm to see a stranger and receive pay for providing help. E. Fuller Torres' The Mind Game, which is a book where witch doctors and psychiatrists explains that in other cultures, a therapist cannot accept a fee unless the treatment is successful. In Nigeria, why am I can't talk for some reason? In Nigeria, helpers or counselors have accepted a female client as a wife in lieu of a fee. So, cognitive dissonance theory, founded by Leon Festinger, a woman has an approach conflict. She has her choice of a beautiful silver watch and an equally stunning gold watch. Both are different brands. She feels the silver model will be perfect for some of her jewelry and outfits, while the gold is ideal for other jewelry and modes of dress. She chooses the silver watch. She will read positive reviews on the silver watch and possibly negative reviews on the gold model after the purchase to justify her behavior and reduce post decisional dissonance. So she's looking to support it supports the tendency to justify behavior to create a state of consonance or harmony between attitudes and behavior. So this is an approach because she has a decision to make out of two positive things. And what she's going to do is, and after her decision, and she wants cognitive consistency or consonance, harmony, and not the dissonance or discord. So that's why she wants to look at positive reviews for what she bought and negative reviews for the one she didn't buy to support this. An individual who purchased a $50,000 watch, cognitive dissonance theory postulates that he or she might ignore positive information regarding other models and secure a lot of information regarding the 50,000 platinum model, and he or she might focus heavily on negative information regarding rival models because, again, you want consonance, harmony, support for your behavior and your thought process. Cognitive dissonance theory predicts that the person will look for things which are consistent with his or her behavior. Dissonance to consonance can be done through denial, justification, or rationalization. So, a counselor reading this book says, I couldn't care less about passing my comprehensive exam. This is an attempt to reduce dissonance by denial, thus minimizing tension. Not caring is inconsistent with reading the book to help you pass. So there is some denial because yes, you do care. In rationalization, there's the sweet lemon or sour grape. Sweet lemon is, even though my car is old and doesn't run well, it sure keeps my insurance payments low. So, sweet lemon rationalization is trying to come up with or using a positive to rationalize. And then sour grape would be, the opposite. Anything where is it has a negative connotation. Consistency is a desirable personality trait in most cultures. All right. So, three basic categories of conflict which results in frustration. We have the approach, meaning you have equally attractive options. This is the easiest when both can be attempted because it's approach. They're both good things, but it's very, very easy when you can do both. Approach avoidance, meaning one positive and one negative. This is the toughest type of conflict due to the highest level of frustration. So approach avoidance is the highest, creates the highest level of frustration, approach avoidance, because it's either going to be good or bad. Avoidance, which is two negative or undesirable options. Client often daydream, flee from the situation, or regress instead of confronting the choices. May waver or hesitate when he comes close to making a choice for avoidance. We have the bystander effect or bystander apathy. A woman who is being robbed would find that the number of people who would respond to her distress actually decreases while the time it will take to intervene increases as the number of bystanders increases. So, if a woman was to be getting robbed, the number, as there's more people, she can expect to receive little to no help. Because the more people it is, the less that there will be intervention. Diffusion of responsibility is that everyone assumes somebody else will step in and take charge. So that's the diffusion of responsibility, assuming somebody else will step in and take charge. Altruism is helping an individual in distress or an unselfish concern for others. It applies psychologically when working with groups and a client is the victim of scapegoating or blaming, and you step in as the leader to emotionally protect this client. Unselfish concern for others or helping an individual in distress. So that's how it looks in counseling, especially in group. Stepping in for someone who is the victim of scapegoating or blaming. Middle class and upper class clients slash citizens most want a counselor who helps them work it out on their own. The theory is that most middle and upper class citizens are taught that independence is a virtue. The person would not want to be dependent on a therapist, parents, or others. So that's just general information about middle and upper class clients and citizens. They value their independence, so they like to work things out on their own. Traditional cultures, which place a high premium on authority figures, um, supports passivity on the part of the counselor, would be, well, excuse me, in traditional cultures, which place a high premium on authority figures, passivity on the part of the counselor would be viewed in a negative manner. A client would be disappointed if he or she did not receive advice. So, in a traditional culture, when they value authority, the counselor would be an authority figure. So, they don't want the counselor to be passive. They would be disappointed if they did not receive advice. Assigning homework and teaching on the part of the counselor would be appropriate. An active directive model works best with persons who respond well to an authority figure. such as Asian Americans. They respond well to authority figures. Asian Americans may respond best to brief therapy that is directive and structured with specific problem solving goals. Low income clients generally views the helper as an advice giver. Approximately 50% of all ethnic minority clients quit counseling after the first session, feeling they will not secure what they want from the helper. Clients in higher social classes have more time to look within themselves or introspect since they do not dwell as much on external survival needs. So, when you think about the Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, and like the base being food, water, shelter, those for higher class, those things are already, they're already achieved. Like it's not, there's no question about it. So they have a little more time to, look within themselves, introspect, and just review their problems versus someone who is in the lower class is like, I can't dwell too much on my problems because I need to figure out how I'm gonna put food on the table. So looking if there's a question about who may be able to be a little more introspective, that's going to be the higher class individual. So children abused by parents are more likely to be abusers when they have children of their own. Parents who do not tolerate or use aggression when raising children produce less aggressive children. All right, so we're going to roll into Carl Rogers, who has the Rogerian theory, which was initially called non directive counseling, then changed to client centered therapy, and then to person centered therapy. Carl Rogers has been used more than other models to help promote understanding between cultures and races. So, if there's a question about which theory or which model best promotes understanding between culture and races, that's going to be Carl Rogers and his person centered counseling. He conducted workshops to enhance cross cultural communication. People from all over the world participated. Person centered techniques are popular in Japan. Person centered therapy is non judgmental, and this is considered a superb modality for multicultural slash multiracial usage. The exception could occur when counseling an ethnic or racial group that demands structure or authority from a helper. And that's just like what we talked about earlier with like Asian Americans who prefer directive or active directive being best for the group who prefers structure and authority. Therapeutic surrender is when the client psychologically surrenders himself to a counselor from a different culture and becomes open with feelings and thoughts. It happens when the client is able to trust the counselor and self discloses. The factors to therapeutic surrender are rapport, trust, listening, conquering client resistance, and self-disclosure. Trust is easier to, in trust, it is easier to trust people from one's own culture. Lower income people often don't trust others from a higher social class. Lower income clients may feel that they will end up as losers dealing with a counselor from a higher social class. In therapeutic surrender, language barriers intensify the difficulty of therapeutic surrender. Steer clear of slang or jargon and try to speak clear, concise, and direct. A client a client African American male would most likely have the An African American male would most likely have the most difficulty with self disclosure when speaking to a white counselor. African American males are especially hesitant revealing themselves to whites. Males in general have difficulty expressing feelings. Counselors can more easily advise clients from their own culture. To persuade someone is easiest when he or she has similar views, ideas, and backgrounds to one's own. It is entirely possible that a client from a different background has been taught not to trust persons with the counselor's cultural background. It's easiest to empathize with a client who is similar to you. Clients who have counselors of the same ethnicity tend to stay in counseling longer. Often, individuals are courteous and polite with those who are of the same cultural origin, but are suspicious and don't trust outsiders. So, often, individuals are courteous and polite with those who are of the same cultural origin, but are suspicious and don't trust outsiders. A client from another culture will speak to the counselor differently from the way he or she would when speaking to someone from his or her own culture. So, flight to health defense mechanism. This is a box of things to know. Flight to health defense mechanism is an analytic concept which asserts that the client has improved too rapidly and the real difficulty or unconscious conflicts has not been resolved. So that's flight to health defense mechanism. Um, Jumping, leaping, hopping to improvement without actually solving the real or unconscious conflicts. Flight from reality is when the client resorts to psychosis or losing touch with reality to avoid dealing with current life difficulties. So, flight to health defense mechanism is an analytic concept which asserts that the client has improved too rapidly and the real difficulty or unconscious conflicts has not been resolved. Where flight from reality is when the client resorts to psychosis, i.e., losing touch with reality to avoid dealing with current life difficulties. Then we have the contrast theory. Assimilation contrast theory is when a client will perceive a counselor's statement that is somewhat like his or her own beliefs as even more similar. So this is an assimilation error. And perceive any dissimilar attitudes as even more dissimilar. Contrast error. So contrast theory is the assimilation, and we know the assimilation is believing or adapting to culture so much that you lose your own culture and identity. Um, so a client will perceive a counselor's statement that is somewhat like his or her own beliefs as even more similar, assimilation error, and perceive any dissimilar attitudes as even more dissimilar, contrast error. Transference transference relates to incidents which occurred prior to treatment. Such issues must be distinguished from the current helping relationship. So, positive transference is love and affection. Negative transference would be hostility. So, transference can be positive or negative, or ambivalent transference, which is uncertainty. And ambivalent transference is the rapidly shifting his or her emotional attitude toward the counselor based on authority figures from the past. That's ambivalent transference or uncertainty. White privilege is the focus on the white privilege focus on the special advantages, privileges, and opportunities that non whites don't have. Monolithic perspective. The counselor perceives all the people in a given group, say African Americans or Latino Americans, as being identical. Counselors are urged to adopt an individualistic perspective. You want an individualistic perspective looking at the individual person versus a monolithic perspective which perceives all the people in a given group as being identical. Structuring in context of multicultural counseling asserts that counseling is most effective when the nature and structure of the counseling situation is described during the initial session. So, structuring is structuring the sessions, the therapeutic journey, and setting the expectations. The counselor will explain the role of the helper as well as the role of the helpee, further enhancing the effectiveness of the counseling process. The greater the social slash cultural gap, the more important the need for structuring. Some would claim that the Rogerian model, which is person centered, falls short of the ideal paradigm or model when a high degree of structure is the treatment of choice. Because if you want a high degree of structure, then you don't need person centered because there's really no structure in person centered. That's just providing like an unjudgmental, safe space where the person is in charge and control of the therapeutic session. There's not going to be structure in that person centered. So you have the connotative error. Connotation applies to the emotional content of a word, which is different from the true or dictionary definition. So you can have a connotative error, which is the connotation applies to the emotional content of a word, which is different from the true or dictionary definition. So like the connotative of error could be like, oh, she's bad, but you're not meaning bad in the sense of dictionary word bad, but you're meaning like she's bad, like she's a bad mama jamma. Like the emotional content is different because that's a compliment, not an insult. So that's connotative error can be present in multicultural counseling. Three major barriers to intercultural counseling are culture bound values, class bound values, and language differences. So that's culture, class, and language. Confounding variable is an extraneous variable which is not purposely introduced by an experimenter conducting research. This difficulty is inherent in correlation data. I'm sorry, that's a box of things to know. The confounding variable is an extraneous extraneous an extraneous variable which is not purposely introduced by an by an experimenter conducting research. This difficulty is inherent in correlation data. All right. People of color refers to Asians. People of color, or POC, refers to Asian Pacific, Latino, African, Native Americans, and those that are multiracial. By approximately 2043, these groups will eventually outnumber whites of European descent in the US. Monolingual means one or single language. Bilingual is two or more languages. The bilingual counselor would ideally be bicultural, having familiarity with the culture of the counselor and the client. The 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. the Board of Education, which outlawed public school segregation, was a prime factor in the history of multicultural counseling. And so was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But also know the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. the Board of Education, which outlawed public school segregation, was a prime factor in the history of multicultural counseling. Desegregation created culturally different populations for school teachers. A box of things to know. Viktor Frankl is the father of logotherapy and existential and existential. All right. Box of things to know. Viktor Frankl is the father of logotherapy, an existential form of treatment which stresses healing through meaning. So logotherapy, think Viktor Frankl, and healing through meaning, which is the basis of existential therapy. Fritz Perls is the father of Gestalt therapy. Like Fritz Perls, just think like Italian or something, and Gestalt. Like, so you want to say both of them with an accent. Attempts to perfect or improve a mind body split, supposedly responsible for emotional distress. Gestalt is a German word meaning the whole form, figure, or configuration. So Gestalt means the whole form, figure, or configuration. And it Gestalt therapy, found pioneered by Fitz Perls, attempts to perfect a mind body split that would be responsible for the emotional distress. Electic position, i.e., selecting treatment intervention strategies from diverse counseling models, is a goal of multicultural counseling. Next, we have emic versus etic, etic, emic versus etic perspectives. Emic is a culture specific perspective from the word phonemic meaning sound, phonemic meaning sounds in a particular language. So emic, a perspective, culture specific perspective from the word phonemic, meaning sounds in a particular language. It's an insider's perception of the culture, the insider's perception of one's own culture. A counselor slash researcher wants to know what somebody participating in the culture thinks. It emphasizes that each client is an individual with individual differences. So EMIC think me, my individual. They want a counselor or researcher wants my individual perspective of my culture. Etic, humans believes like humans are humans regardless of background and culture. Thus, the same theories and techniques they believe that the same theories and techniques can be applied to any client the counselor helps. So they would not be elected because they're not going to change or base their approach off someone's culture. They're like my theory is going to apply regardless of culture. It emphasizes the sameness among clients. So it's a universal perspective that literally transcends cultural boundaries. They think that the sameness among clients transcends cultural boundaries. The counselor would not alter his technique when working with clients from a different culture or a minority group. That was emic versus etic. Then we have the alloplastic versus autoplastic dilemma. Alloplastic viewpoint, the client can cope better by changing or altering external factors in the environment. Example, if you're unhappy with the system, get out there and rebel. You can change the system. So, alloplastic viewpoint, think aloe vera. Aloe vera is used to treat the external or outside wounds. So, aloe vera is altering external factors. You would use aloe vera on the outside of your skin. Autoplastic viewpoint asserts that change comes from the self, the self, such as thoughts and behaviors. So when you think autoplastic, think autoimmune diseases, that's internal, inside sickness. So alloplastic and autoplastic dilemma is about change. Alloplastic is about changing external factors. Autoplastic, autoimmune would be changing internal factors. You change yourself. Conversion disorder, a person displays symptoms, generally neurological, which cannot be accounted for via medical reasons. So, a medical diagnosis shows no reason for the individual's condition. So, a conversion disorder, a person displays symptoms, generally neurological, which cannot be accounted for via medical reasons. A medical diagnosis shows no reason for the individual's condition. With labile indifference, it means that they do not seem to be bothered or concerned by their condition. They are not intentionally creating the symptoms, hence, the implication is the condition is fueled by stress and emotions rather than physical factors. And the example we have for that one was like if someone had like feel like as though they couldn't use their arm, like no use their arm is there. Medically, there's no diagnosis of saying, okay, your arm has an injury or anything of that nature, but neurologically, they cannot come to the grips of being able to use their arm. So the implication is this is fueled by stress and emotions rather than physical factors, because remember, there's nothing physically wrong with their arm. So, counseling, biofeedback, and relaxation therapy might be helpful if someone has a conversion disorder. Malingering occurs when a person fakes a physical or emotional illness to avoid work, military duty, or prison.